שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם.
Welcome to another edition of A Voice to the Gentile Church. I'm Jim Wingrider, and next to me is Pastor Roger Diaz. Next to him is Dolores Lowe. And interestingly, the new topic of discussion today is that there's a giant in the land, and I don't mean a supermarket. So what say you about the giant?
So the giant is this statue, huge statue, that is built with built-in LED so that you can project imagery onto it.
Till you got to LED, I'm thinking Daniel and the image that he had made that looked like him.
Right.
A very tall statue also.
Exactly. And if you watch the video from the people who are making it, so it's supposed to be, quote, a attraction, but when you listen to this video, it's all about humanism and how great man is and all this stuff, and it does remind us of Revelation, right?
Yeah, right away.
Right away, it comes out. It's going to be $18 to $24 million per statue.
How many are we talking about making?
21. So they were originally going to have 21 statues in 21 cities in the year 2021. A couple of the cities that they mentioned were Phoenix and Dublin, and they think that it was supposed to return in revenue would be $14 million a year. So that you spend $24 million.
I mean, nobody's going to build something like that without the hope of making money off of it.
So, but it's bizarre. It's really bizarre.
So one of the things that I watched the video, and one of the things that they said was that with some of them, you can step into a full body scanner,
right,
and it'll scan your complete body and countenance, and for an hour, I guess that's where they make their money, for an hour, the image will be you.
Right.
So who are they? Who's spearheading this effort, and why? What's behind it?
Yeah.
It is a group out of Ireland.
Okay.
It's one is an attorney, an attorney firm, right? And the other one is an architectural firm.
So someone's behind them.
I'm sure, yes.
So 21, 21, 21, right? So think about it. 21 statues in 21 cities
in
the year 2021. We know that the United Nations since 1984 actually has been promoting the Agenda 21.
Right.
Yep.
Which is what it's referred to as the New World Order.
Yep.
Who referred to it as the New World Order? Some conspiracists? No. George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr. in Rio de Janeiro, Earth Day 1994, held the entire Agenda 21 in front of him and said it's time for a New World Order. And the entire Earth Day seminar was about the promotion of their great agenda, their hope for the 21st century. So I can't help but think that there's some connectivity there. There's some nexus there that's pretty obvious. Agenda 21, 21 statues, 21 cities in the year 2021.
Yep.
So what are they saying? What are they telegraphing?
Right. Well, it's certainly a humanist. When you listen or watch the video, it's a very humanist message, right? The heroes of humanity are going to be projected. It's going to speak words of wisdom, you know.
It's almost as if this image, that's what it is, an image, is going to provide counsel for humanity.
Right.
It's sort of no, I watched the video once. I didn't need to see it the second time. And the video had a very mysterious quality to it. And it was purposely done. It was purposely done to present itself as something that was mystical,
right,
had spiritual quality to it.
Yep.
Almost Far Eastern.
Yeah, a very dark background.
A tinge of Hinduism in there. So what is that about? And how large is the statue exactly?
Oh, now you stumped me because I don't
I
remember.
think they said something about 150 feet or
It could be. It
175
has
I
feet
was
or
going to
something
say
like
3-4 stories, maybe
Yeah.
5 stories tall.
It has a restaurant on it and it has this. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Does the
how do we
restaurant
feel-
spin around in a circle while you're eating?
I put a post on Facebook. I wonder if they're gonna force it to wear a mask. I don't know. So how do we feel about this thing? I mean, it's
So
what are our feelings on this?
when I watched the video for the first time, I felt that offensiveness of man being supreme over everything, right? That's exactly how they were projecting.
That is the message of humanism.
Yes. And it
Human
was sad.
achievement, human endeavor.
Right, exactly.
Right.
That's exactly what they were pushing.
What man is capable of?
Yes.
Well, we know what man is capable of.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Jim? What's your sense on this?
Well, it
image,
made my skin
this
crawl
statue?
because right away what comes to mind is Revelation 13.
13. We'll read that here in a
And the
moment.
image
it
of
is
the beast.
imagery.
Yep.
It's a figure. It's a literal, physical object, but it's an image.
Yep.
It presents an image. So yeah. So you get a sense that it's somehow tied into the biblical narrative of end times.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Not just a little creepy.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And to me, I'll marvel at the people that don't see it as creepy.
I know. The interesting thing is you just said almost like it could give us counsel.
Mm-hmm.
They're just a step away from that because you can make some artificial intelligence algorithms,
Absolutely.
throw it in there, and next thing you know, this thing
Absolutely.
is speaking to you, words of counsel.
This image that they're working on is probably a prototype of something that's much bigger,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps literally bigger, that will include all of those algorithms and so on. It's a foreshadow of something to come. That I know without any question. So one of the first things that came to mind, of course, is the image of the beast in Revelation chapter 13. That's kind of a low-hanging fruit. But it also points to Nebuchadnezzar,
Right.
Yep.
when he wanted an image of himself made, and that everybody should bow down, not to him, but to the image.
Right. Yep.
Isn't that
So
interesting?
that's
Yeah.
indicative of what we're seeing here, that an image is being made, and people ultimately, I believe, with the way it's being presented, will treat it with awe. It's an
idol.
It's an idol.
Right.
They made definite references to icons, presenting to humanity some of humanity's icons.
Right.
So it's definitely in that realm of spookiness. So in Revelation chapter 13 now, we're going to read 11 to 15.
Sure.
Let me preempt you before you read it. So Revelation chapter 13 is an introduction to what the Bible refers to as a beast.
Right.
A beast. A beast, according to Bible interpretation, is a government, a kingdom. God sees these kingdoms as beasts. Daniel saw 4 beasts, and there were 4 kingdoms that will come upon the earth. Now, Daniel saw what's referred to as the great beast, or the 4th beast. And Daniel was troubled about this 4th beast that he saw. He queried the angel, and the angel said, the 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will come upon the earth. It will crush and subdue the entire world. So the 4th kingdom that Daniel saw in succession, in a chronological order, the last one, the 4th one, would be a global kingdom.
Right.
A global beast. And this is where the concept comes from for the beast of Revelation chapter 11, 13 all the way to 20. The last time we see any mention of the beast in the book of Revelation is in Revelation chapter 20. The beast is in the lake of fire.
Right.
That's the last reference to the beast. So the beast of Revelation chapter 13 is a global government with 10 horns. Daniel sees the same beast with 10 horns. The 10 horns are representative of 10 governing bodies that will have governance over the beast, over this world system. So you'll have 10 governing bodies, which, by the way, the UN is moving towards. The Club of Rome, that organization, that's no longer conspiracy stuff. It's now out in the open. The Club of Rome have been working for decades to to construct a system of governance for humanity where there would be 10 regional kingdoms governing over this entire planet. And they are moving forward. A year ago, they had a huge conference, I think somewhere in Italy, where they began to promote more and more their idea of a 10-horned government, a beast. So this is the beast of Revelation chapter 13. Then John sees a second beast. Not like the first beast. This second beast was religious. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke as a dragon. Right? And this second beast now has power to bring humanity into submission to the first beast. So it's as if the second beast, or the religious beast, is given the authority from the dragon, that's what it says in Revelation 13, to create acquiescence, where the world will acquiesce or worship and bow down, surrender to the first beast. Then what we're going to see here is that the first beast has an image made of itself. There's an image that's presented to the world that the world has to worship. And if you do not worship the image of the government, you will be persecuted unto death. So I used to wonder about that when I first started to study eschatology. What is this? What would the image of a world order look like? What would the image of a world government look like? What is that about? And when I saw that video for the first time last night, I said, wait a minute. Wait. That's it. Could that be it? Could this be it? That the world government is going to forge some sort of an image using technology, and they will say, this image or this personage in this image represents who we are, the hope of humanity, and here it is.
So,
and at some point in the future, they might introduce a statue, a giant, that's colossal, perhaps, the size of who knows, the Statue of Liberty or something, and say, well, here it is.
Right.
And perhaps, who knows, I'm not saying for sure, I'm not saying dogmatically that this is it, but I can see now where, and you're going to read that text for us, I can see now where that text can be fulfilled, literally, that this world system, the same ones that came up with Agenda 21, 21, 21, 21, this world system is going to put together an effort to create this image and have the world just completely awed by it.
So the interesting thing about what you just said is the Club of Rome and their 10 regions, every single Western Hemisphere government is working right now to make that a reality.
Yes.
Because what do you need in a nation to keep a nation solid, right? You need borders, language, and culture.
Absolutely.
And all of the borders of the Western nations are now under attack, right? We have the south of us, the southern border is just, forget it, it's a sieve.
Porous.
And then you go to Europe and England, Germany, all of them, Greece, they're all in the same situation,
Well,
under attack.
we know that there are world forces, global forces that are working to make these borders non-existent. The Pope was very involved, Francis was very involved in Europe accepting these so-called refugees from the Middle East, and he was also involved, at least with rhetoric, with the refugees that are coming up from South and Central America.
Right.
So yes, absolutely, there is, and conspiracies are conspiracies until they become real.
Exactly.
Then you get called a conspiracy theorist. So there is an overall effort in the world to minimalize nationalism.
Right.
In fact, to do away with nationalism and introduce the new system where there would be 10 governing bodies, and the whole world would be, again, a one world government with 10 horns, the beast of Revelation. So we would have no foot to stand on in the eyes of many if George Bush Sr. himself, the great conservative, did not get up and promote this.
Right.
But he did.
He wasn't a conservative. Even
Well, of course, we
Andy,
know that. That's
Andy
why I
was a
said-
Rhodes Scholar.
That's why I
Well,
said
he
the
was
great-
also
the great
director of the
conservative.
CIA, right?
Right.
At one point in his
Right.
life, so.
Listen, we're all being deceived, or many are being deceived. So let's read that verse in Revelation chapter 13.
And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast. And the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed.
So I'm not saying that this is the absolute fulfillment or even likely fulfillment, but I can see where, based on that type of technology, ultimately, the world system would say we need to bring into existence one entity, one intelligent entity, and this entity has to be an image, and he will be sort of the spokesman of the world system. And I can see where we're going in terms of humanity's intelligence at this time, that it won't be long before we would just go right along with something like this and begin to even see this created entity as an actual person.
Right.
And, worship him and hold him up on that platform where he will be worshipped, or it will be worshipped. So, yeah, there is a connection, there is a possibility. I'm not saying for sure that that's what it is. I'm saying it's a clear path for that to happen.
Yeah, I mean, either way, when you watch the video, you certainly get that sense of idolatry, because this thing is going to have the heroes and icons of humanity,
Iconism,
right?
and
so
it's all in there.
If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it swims like a duck, it might be a duck.
It's going to woo humanity, that's for sure. It's going to capture man's attention for sure. Now, what about that Bayside collapse down in Miami? I understand that Israel had troops over there, or troops or emergency workers.
I don't know if people know about this, but probably the best team to, every earthquake.
Excavation.
Right. The best excavation team to save people when there are earthquakes and collapses like this is from Israel. They have all the equipment, they have all the training, they do this regularly, they travel around the world doing this. So when the Bayside building collapsed, they immediately hopped on a plane and came over. Now, unlike normal people in the Western world, they didn't decide to stay in a hotel. They said they couldn't afford the delay in going back and forth and sleeping and eating. So they set up tents right there. And that's where they are. They're living right there in tents, trying to save lives. And I think at this point, they're the only ones that really have hope that they will find people alive, right? Because if you listen to the news, it just gets...
Well, it's been a long time now.
It has.
It's been a week, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but holy cow, no water.
Right.
So Israel's down there right now, sleeping out in tents, dealing with the mosquitoes.
Yep.
Mosquitoes in Florida are not like mosquitoes in Israel. Here, they're well armed.
I've never seen any mosquitoes in Israel, come to think of it.
That's true. I don't remember being bitten.
So, all right, so that's wonderful. That's real positive.
Doing their part to be a light to the world.
Yes.
Israel's over here. And
the interesting thing is, if you were to turn on the news,
I did see a clip on CBS in the morning a couple of days ago on it.
About
it's
Israel?
very small.
On this team that came in,
Right, but it's very small, right?
Right.
It's more...
It's not big news.
Yeah, it's more social media that's, proclaiming
but
it.
It's positive. It's, Israel is reflecting itself as a servant.
Right.
Coming to the aid of the community in Miami. What is going on with Biden? He's talking about nukes, the American people, the Second Amendment.
Yeah, so he gave a speech on gun control last week. And not only did, so, you know, Second Amendment people, of which I am one, have this motto that was said by Thomas Jefferson, that the tree of liberty needs to grows from the blood of patriots, right? Because that's what happened during the founding of the nation, right? When we went to war against England, people died. So Biden does the speech, and you know how his speeches are, right? It rambles all over the place, and the uhs
he
and the
does
does.
ramble, and it's interesting to me to see the late night comedians just having a heyday with it, because they had such a heyday with Donald,
Yes.
and he gave them plenty of fodder. But
Right.
it's nice to see them having a heyday with him too.
Right. So in an attempt to justify that we don't need the Second Amendment, right, that we should have gun control, he said, not only did he say that statement wasn't true, that the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots, but then he said,
I disagree. Jefferson
So do
meant
I.
exactly what he said.
exactly. Then he said, and this was just, my jaw dropped. He said, well, if you think you're going to come against the government with guns, you're going to need an F-15 because the government has F-15
Well,
and
who said-
nukes.
But who said they were going to do that?
Nobody.
Nobody.
But, I mean, and I'm sitting here going, wait a minute, a couple of things. You're threatening your population because it was a threat,
Right.
F-15s and nukes. And this is the same group that is saying that group on January 6th that took over the Capitol without guns are the threat to all of democracy. But in the next sentence, you need F-15s and nukes to go up against the government. It's insane. And I can't believe that he thought of that himself.
Of course not. No.
And it
I've
makes
heard that
Washington,
argument.
D.C. ground
Yeah.
zero, by
Yes.
the way.
I've heard that
Yeah.
response against people that will support the Second Amendment. I've heard it now for 25 years. It's just unbecoming of an American president to make that statement.
And it's inaccurate, right? Because if we know one thing from World War II,
Right.
the reason the Japanese did not do an all-out assault on the United States was because they were concerned that so much of the population had weapons and that it would be too difficult to take over.
Yeah.
So the Japanese realized
that
this
was true.
way back when.
That was true.
We didn't invade Japan with samurai swords.
Right.
Because we knew if that was the case, they would have taken us.
Exactly.
So they knew that this country is just overwhelmed with people who have guns and they know how to use it. So, yeah, there's no argument. The Second Amendment is solid, but Biden, an American president, making a careless, just a callous statement like
Threatening
that.
the population.
How can the left be content with Biden?
I think they're not. I think that little cartoon that you saw last week of the aliens coming in and saying we're taking over your country and we've killed all your leaders, and the response was, "Yay!"
So the interesting thing is, I read
And that's both sides of the aisle that are saying, "Yay!"
I read a tweet from a liberal who said, even if Joe Biden turned out to be a pedophile, I would still vote for him because I wouldn't need to stand with your moral grandstanding. And I'm like, oh my God, you're calling the abuse of children moral grandstanding.
The irony of that is he probably is.
Yes.
From all that we see, all the
Yes.
indicators are that he is.
I mean, there's smoke, or we wouldn't have said it to begin
Exactly.
with.
Yes.
Absolutely. That's amazing, right?
Yep.
So we have a question.
We do.
This is based on something I said apparently in a podcast.
A little while ago now. We haven't
it's been a
dealt
while.
with this subject in a time.
I might have just thrown that out and said we'll talk about it another time. But
Okay.
so all
Here
right,
we
so-
are.
so
It's
here
another
we are.
time.
Here we are.
I heard a podcast a while back when you said, and I quote, "There is a greater meaning to the parable of the wineskins that has nothing to do with teaching old dogs new tricks." Could you talk about that in your webcast?
All right. So yeah, I know. I think I remember when I said that. But so here we are. we can address this question. I think the traditional understanding of that parable is, basically that John's disciples and those of the Pharisees were not in a position to embrace his new religion because they were steeped in their old ways, and therefore they would not and could not or would refuse to embrace his new religion, and that's what most people would relegate to it, that's what he was talking about, which I don't. Maybe there's some dimension of truth to that, but not much. I've heard other people talk about that parable, and they basically conclude the same thing, that people that are set in their ways will never embrace something new. Like the chosen.
Nicodemus.
Something about embrace the new. Jesus,
Right.
In the shows, Jesus said something like that. Get used to new, right? And no doubt, when it comes to that point in the show, in the episodes, they're going to use that to reference get used to new. Get used to change, or whatever that was. So, get used to different. That's the statement. So that's the point. There's a sort of an idea that what Jesus is saying is get used to different. I don't think so at all.
He never really said that.
Right.
No. And that's the idea that they present concerning the parable of the wineskins. But there's a lot more happening here with that parable than meets the eye. And you really have to look at it in its context, historically, and from the standpoint of who the Pharisees were and who John the Baptist's disciples were. First of all, in many portrayals, John the Baptist is presented as adversarial to the Pharisee movement, the Pharisaic movement. And he wasn't. He was in opposition to the leadership, absolute opposition to the leadership. But the Pharisaic movement did not comprise of the leadership. The Pharisaic movement was very broad in Israel. It was the common man's religion. Faith, I should say. The common Israelite faith was the Pharisaic movement. Of course, the leaders of the Pharisees became stigmatized as the evil, corrupt leadership, which they were.
And I think he criticized them a lot.
Right.
And
He
I
did.
think that it's seen that he had a negative attitude toward them. But the truth is, I think he believed there was hope for them.
Well, probably John did. But Jesus, his disciples, Mary, and the entire community of faith in Israel at that time, more closely identified with the Pharisees than the Sadducees or the Zealots. The Pharisaic movement was given birth to by Ezra the reformer. He introduced reforms, and he actually constructed the religion that became Judaism, in that he dictated or he directed that synagogues should exist in every community, places of learning, places of study, places where in the diaspora away from Jerusalem, Israelites can come together and congregate and study. It was Ezra who implemented that. Based on his movement, his reforms, we have the Pharisaic movement and other movements that came into existence also. So, no, the Pharisees were not necessarily hostile to the people of faith in Israel. They were the people of faith. So we're going to talk about John disciples. John disciples most certainly identified with the Pharisees.
Sure.
And not all of John's disciples became disciples of Jesus, initially anyway.
Right.
There was some connection there, but initially they were two separate movements. And Jesus kept it that way for a very good reason.
Right.
In other words, what we're going to say is that the Pharisaic movement and the movement that John the Baptist had initiated were the same basis of faith, the faith of Israel. I'm choosing not to say the religion of Israel, I'm saying the faith of Israel.
Okay.
But what Jesus had initiated was different. It was an offshoot, and hence we have the word the Zemach. It was an offshoot of what the faith of Israel represented. It wasn't condemnation. It wasn't done to supersede or to create a bad reflection on what was there. It was an offshoot. It was different. It was new.
Right.
And so John apparently sent his disciples to question Jesus about his movement. Why are your disciples different than us? Why are your disciples doing things that are different from what we're doing? That's the essence of the question. And we have to keep this whole parable in context of that question and not stray away from it. So if you would, Jim, if you would read Mark's gospel. Now, in the three synoptic gospels, this parable is presented, and they're more or less the same. I like it in Mark's gospel more than so Mark and Matthew and Luke, because in Mark's gospel, it's pretty straightforward. Little interference from interpretation. So let's read it here in Mark chapter 2, 18 to 22.
And John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And they came and said to him, Jesus, why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast? Jesus said to them, while the bridegroom is with them, the attendants of the bridegroom do not fast, do they? So long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. But the days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, otherwise the patch pulls away from it the new from the old, and a worse tear results.
So hold right there for a moment.
Sure.
So Jesus responds in a way that's indicative of Jesus. He's going to the core of the issue. He's not going to beat around the bush. He's not going to mince words. He's just going to go right to the issue, the essence of the question. And the essence of the question again is, why are you and your disciples doing things that are different from what is traditionally accepted with the Pharisees and with John's disciples? Why are you different? And Jesus goes on to say, well, they are not going to fast or mourn while I'm here, but when I'm not here, then they'll begin to fast and do the things that you're doing. But he brings up that analogy of a garment, let's say a pair of jeans, right? Back in the 70s, I used to wear out my Levi's purposely so I can put a patch on it.
Right.
That was different, but that's what I did back then. It was cool to have a patch.
We had iron-on patches, and they pulled up.
I had a little heart.
So now, the patch that Jesus is referring to is not a fashionable statement. It's a patch that will keep that garment and preserve the garment, right? But his statement says that no one takes a new piece of cloth. Like you don't take, if you really want to keep your Levi's together, you don't take a cut of denim from a new pair of Levi's and put it on an old pair of Levi's, because it will shrink and then you'll destroy the pair of Levi's. So in this analogous statement, the new patch is his movement.
Right.
The old garment is
Traditional.
John's disciples, and traditional Israeli faith.
Yes.
So what is he saying? Don't put what's new on the old, because you will destroy the old.
Right.
So the statement is made in preservation of the garment.
Right. You're right.
He's not saying that the garment is useless. I'm only concerned about the patch. Don't put that what's new, the new patch, a new cloth on the old garment. You'll destroy the garment, right? And then the wineskins.
And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is lost, and the skins as well. But one puts new wine into fresh wineskins.
Right. And the implication there, of course, is that if you put fresh new wine into old skins, you'll destroy the skins, and you'll waste everything. So let's keep that in context. He's speaking about his movement relative to the movement of the Pharisees. The movement of the Pharisees is the old wine and the old skins.
Right.
His movement is the new wine. And he's saying keep them separate. But they're both wineskins.
Right. He's giving value to both.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And since we can't get past without bashing modern Christianity, we have taken this position that the law is bad, totally forgetting that Jesus did a whole sermon on the law, and he didn't say, forget about thou shalt not kill. He rather explained more in depth what thou shalt not kill meant,
Not
right?
one jot or tittle of the law will pass away
Exactly.
until all is fulfilled.
So taken in proper context, the parable of the patch and the garment, the parable of the wine and the skins, he's making a very from my
Yep.
and I hope I can
Yep.
I can see that you guys
Yep.
have seen it too.
I agree.
From our opinion, it's very vivid, very clear, very obvious. He's saying you must preserve the old.
Yes.
Therefore, we keep the new separate from the old. So, he's validating, like you said, he's validating the movement of the Pharisees and John the Baptist and his disciples. Now, it's interesting that the Pharisaic movement and John's disciples, his movement, are seen as one.
Right.
That's very interesting.
Yep.
And again, his response is keep them separate, and that way you'll preserve them both. Now, Christianity in the 4th century came up with supersessionism.
Right.
All right, that's a big word, multi-syllable word. Supersessionism. What is supersessionism? Well, supersessionism is effectively what we call
Replacement
theology.
Okay.
Replacement theology. And so Christianity came up with this notion that we, Christians, we replace Israel. Israel is no longer valid. But in this parable, it's so vivid, Jesus is saying quite clearly that the garment is valuable. Don't put that new patch
Right.
on it. The old skins, don't put the new wine in old skins. By the way, which is more valuable, the old or the new wine?
The old wine.
Yeah.
The old wine, right?
Yep.
So don't put the new wine. In other words, my disciples, this movement, the Zemach, the offshoot, because that's what that movement was, an offshoot. This offshoot movement is to remain distinct, a part of,
Right.
but distinct, not to put them together, because you will ruin God's intentions.
Right.
God's intention, and apparently from the statement, from the parable, is that you would have 2 wineskins filled with wine, the
Right.
old and the new, not together, separate, but having the same purpose. That's what it's saying. So Christianity comes along and says, no, that's not. All we need is a new wine, new skins. It's the only valid wine and wineskins. The old wine, old skins are to be done away with. So
Yeah, that's not what he said.
Right.
the point here is that Jesus is addressing what we sometimes refer to as dual covenant,
Right.
dual covenantism.
So if you can't embrace dual covenantism, then you can't see it.
Right.
So many years ago, 12 years ago, a very, very famous, out in the open preacher, very, very charismatic preacher, preached on dual covenant, and he supported dual covenant, and the organization that led his church came along and said, you can't preach that, and he recanted.
He did.
He recanted on the support of dual covenant. Now, dual covenantism is heresy to about 100% of Christianity.
And 99.99, because then
99, right.
you know,
So
we're there.
Right.
so
Wait,
you look at Christianity in its conventional form, there's no room for dual covenants.
Right.
There is no tolerance for the idea that God still values the old wine and the old skin. Even though that parable was very clear, they take the position that somewhere in the 3rd century God changed his mind, and he chose to honor only the new wine and the new skins. How do we feel about it? Now, we've talked
Well,
about
again,
replacement theology quite a bit. Is there a biblical basis for replacement theology? I mean, is there anything in the Gospels that comes right out and says that, hey, we're going to replace you, Israel?
Nope.
Quite the contrary. There's plenty that says don't take that attitude that
Right.
you can replace them.
Yep.
Now, there are references that Jesus made that can be taken that way. Absolutely.
Okay.
Can be taken that way. The most striking is his statements on the vineyard, the
Right.
parable of
Oh,
the vineyard.
yes.
So if you twist the parable of the
Right.
vineyard, you can make it say that. Yeah.
So in the parable of the vineyard, Jesus is very clear, and he articulates it very well, that God's going to he's going to replace the vine growers
Right.
with a nation that's more capable, more worthy, more
Right.
faithful, and
Right.
will give the vineyard over to that nation. So that statement can be very easily connected to replacement theology.
Sure.
If you don't know that the parable of the vineyard goes back to the book of Isaiah.
Right.
Right.
In Isaiah chapter 5, we've talked about this before. In Isaiah chapter 5, it's the same vineyard.
Right.
And in that vineyard, in that parable, the vineyard is Israel.
Right.
I mean, Isaiah comes right out and says it. Israel is the vineyard. In that parable, the owner of the vineyard destroys the vineyard, and he destroys the vat and the tower that he built in it, because the people that he had commissioned to care for the vineyard were not faithful.
Right.
It was an allegorical statement towards what he would do with Israel, the tower being the temple and the vat being the sacrificial order. He will destroy it. He will do away with it. Now, Isaiah, of course, made multiple references to the restoration, when everything would be restored, even the vineyard.
Right.
So Jesus comes along and he talks about the vineyard, the same parable,
Right.
but he brings an additional perspective, and that additional perspective has to do with the replacement of the ones who were responsible for the vineyard. So who were responsible for the vineyard?
The
leadership.
The leadership of Israel. In fact, in that parable in Matthew chapter 21, when Jesus got done with the parable, it says it right there. The scribes and the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin,
Right.
in other words, they knew he was referring to them, and they wanted to
He
kill
was
him,
talking about them.
and they wanted
Right.
to get rid of him that much more.
Right.
They knew it was pointed at them. In other words, they knew the preacher was preaching at them.
So what's missing here is that Christianity doesn't want to pay any attention to the Old Testament, but
Right.
everybody Jesus was talking to in that moment knew Isaiah and knew exactly what he was talking about.
So we're not going to get into what Jesus meant by when he said that there would be a nation of people that would be faithful to care for the vineyard. We believe that nation of people is the church. 99.99% of them will not be included,
Exactly.
but the
Right.
church will stand up at some point and become that faithful people that will be able to care for the vineyard. I mean, Jesus said it to his disciples, to those that have overcome. Big factor right there. For those that will overcome, I will give you to sit on 12 thrones and judge the 12 tribes of Israel. Care for the vineyard. That's what
Right.
he's saying. So that's going to happen. There's no replacement theology there at all, except that the leadership of Israel will be replaced by a leadership that will be faithful. So replacement theology is a farce. It's heresy from a biblical perspective. But again, 99.999% of Christianity embraces replacement theology. Now, what we've talked about tonight in regards to that parable, from my point of view, settles the argument. It's pretty obvious what he's saying. But you're not going to be able to take that argument, that simple argument, and convince Christianity. Why is that? Why would the light of what we've just considered with that parable not have any effect on Christianity? Anyone?
Well, a couple of things. I think Christianity feels, Paul clearly says that we have been adopted, we have been grafted in, right? And Christianity, modern Christianity, views that as being less than, right? They don't realize that there is value, inherent value in both, and it's not a one is better or worse than the other. There's inherent value. And I think there's some jealousy there also. Modern Christianity has jealousy. Hey, we're the new guys. Jealousy and vanity, right? We're the new guys. We are better than you. You don't know what you're saying, which to me is a total affront considering how much Israel has been through to preserve the faith, right? Because if you're a Christian and Judaism had died, our faith, think about it, the faith that is now replacement theology is the same faith that allowed Hitler to do what he was doing. Right? That's why Dietrich Bonhoeffer died, because he saw it and he tried to proclaim it. Because what the mainstream denominations were saying at the time was, yes, we've replaced Israel, we've replaced the Jew, we don't need the Jew. That's what mainstream was saying.
And that's an ancient position. It goes all the way back to Nicaea.
Yeah.
And even before Nicaea. The church at Rome All right, this is where the schism began.
Right.
Yep.
And the letter that Paul wrote to the Romans was, we've talked about this, I don't need to bring it back up again, but that letter was designed to put down that the seed of that rebellion, the seed of that ideology that Israel is not needed. And the Roman believers were in that position where they were saying, hey, we don't have to serve you in the congregation because you're Jews and you have the law. We are Romans here. And we don't need the law. They were antinomians.
Yep.
And so that movement of antinomianism began at the Church at Rome and went all the way to Nicaea and still exists in the church today. One aspect of antinomianism is that Judaization is an offense.
Right.
Because the early church that was seen as Judaizers, they were observing the law. And the Romans said, hey, wait a minute, we are proud antinomians here. We don't want the law. You're observing the law, then you must die. I'm just being frank. That's how they treated the early believers that were quote-unquote Judaizers. And they were Judaizers, I say we because I'm in that camp now. We were Judaizers because we saw the law of God as valid, necessary to be fulfilled, not for salvation, but for righteousness, as the Bible says. And so here we are. The church at Rome said, no, you must die. And does the church still hold that position today? Has there been any real reformation? No. We're still there today. And so this parable, I think, is a shot straight in the eye of this whole construct of Christianity. Jesus said it. Don't destroy the garment by putting what's new on it. Preserve the garment. Put an old patch on it. Sustain its antiquity.
So,
sustain it. Keep it.
Yeah. So I work in engineering, and everything we do has to meet a standard, or you have total chaos and what your building doesn't work. And it just baffles me. We have the standard. The standard was written. The standard is here. Yeah. And it just baffles me that Christians would throw the standard out, and that's why we are in the position that we are, because we don't have a standard. We're not living to the standard.
There's hundreds of years of you're not educated and you don't know what you're reading, and so and it was all in another language anyway, and so you just take the word of the priest. He's looking out for you. He's taking care of you, and they just and it's easier that way. It's easier to let somebody else think for you.
It is.
The leadership of the Pharisees were in that very place. They created a construct of Israeli faith that became a hierarchical system. The leadership of the Pharisees did that. And these are the Pharisees that Jesus berets, and these are the Pharisees that John the Baptist insulted. You brood of vipers.
Right.
So that movement did that and formed what became that religion, that order. But Jesus himself said, in fact, Jesus represented, he was sort of a rebel from their perspective because he didn't study in their institutions.
Right.
He wasn't a part of their order. He didn't study under any particular rabbi. He was just someone that was uneducated from their perspective because they asked him, when did you learn? Who taught you?
Right.
By whose authority are you speaking? But he was someone who was anointed of the Holy Spirit and able to teach. Didn't have their qualifications, and that was a threat. And that's the way it is today. So the convention of Christianity will consider people like us and say, where did you get that from?
Right, right.
You know, under whose authority are you proclaiming such things?
Yep.
Your question was, what would it take for Christianity to embrace what we're saying here? And I'm speaking from my own perspective. I sat in a Presbyterian church and embraced everything of what Presbyterianism is. And for me, it took a breakthrough by the hand of God and a breaking of my arrogant spirit to be willing to sit down and hear and receive. The institutional church won't receive it, but individuals will.
I am convinced that at Nicaea, something deeply demonic happened.
Yes.
And it's pretty obvious what happened. When you read about the apostasy that Paul spoke of, which is what Nicaea became, the lawless one takes his place in the Naos, the Church of God, and presents himself to be as God. This lawless one is Constantine. Who was Constantine? Well, we've talked about this ad infinitum. Who was Constantine? Well, he was a Roman god. That's who he was, a Roman god. And from the standpoint of Yeshua, he sat upon the throne of Satan. Jesus said it to the church of Pergamon. I know where Satan's throne is, where his seat is, in the midst of Pergamon. Pergamon was the place where the emperors were worshipped.
Right.
So back to Greece and carrying through into Rome.
With of Olympus, the Mount Olympus, with the worship of Zeus. So just to keep it in perspective, someone sitting in the throne of Satan, representing Zeus, Satan, the emperor of Rome, presided over a council that determined the direction of Christianity for the next at least 1,500 years. How can that not be demonic?
Right.
Right.
How can that not be demonically charged? So Christianity, I'll put it to you this way, Christianity is demonized and needs deliverance.
Right.
Deliverance will come in the form of reformation. And of course, the Holy Spirit is an active component in that whole thing.
So, you know, in Revelations, when Jesus says, you come to me and you say, Lord, Lord, and he says, depart, I knew you not.
Right.
This perfectly explains that verse. Because we have all these people in Christianity running around doing good deeds, but ignoring the foundation of God's plan, which is two covenanted people doing what God plans for them to do. So, of course, you know, they're going to be shocked, and it's sad, because they're going to be totally shocked when they come before. Yeah. It's just sad.
They could not possibly conceive that God is going to use a people other than themselves. Mm-hmm. As if we're so worthy of it.
Right.
As if we're so faithful at being God's vessel. How faithful is Christianity? I mean, honestly, who represents all of Christianity? I mean, frankly, who today represents the leadership of Christianity?
Not sure where you're going with this. Well, the Pope?
Not a rhetorical question.
Okay.
The Pope.
Yeah, the Pope.
The office of the Holy See, the office of the Vatican, from the standpoint of most of the world, represent Christianity. From the standpoint of our friends in Israel, when they see us, they see the Pope.
I'm sorry.
They can't help it.
I know.
So they see Christianity as being representative of Rome. The Roman Church, still alive today and very well. Yeah. Well, that's the apostasy. My argument is I think in my mind settles it. The church today is still connected to the schism that began at the church at Rome. When Paul wrote that letter, he was concerned about what was happening there.
Right.
It was the initiation, the seed of the apostasy. The apostasy is alive and well today. And it's represented in many forms. Replacement theology is one of the forms. And so it's for that reason the church, most Christians are blinded and would not see this.
We have so many questions that are not answered. I mean, Paul writes a letter to Rome. He'd never been to Rome. He went to Rome arrested.
Right.
Supposedly Peter was there. He died there. He's buried there. But we don't ever see him actually interacting with a body of people. It appears that on the day of Pentecost that there were Romans in Jerusalem who experienced the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, went back to Rome and started a church. It wasn't...
But they were Roman exiles. They were exiles. They were Jews who were in Jerusalem for the festival.
Right.
So they were Israelites.
Right.
Who came from Rome.
Right.
And they went back and they took this whole new impetus, this movement to Rome, and Gentiles began to integrate into it. And the Romans had integrated into it. Most of them were middle class, and they were the military class. Right. So you see, they were stronger than the Israelites, than the Jews who were in the community, and they wanted to exercise that strength over them. And that's where the seed of Nicaea was planted.
Right.
And it's very much
I mean,
alive
Peter
today.
would have given some leadership to that, but we don't know how long he was actually able to be there before he was arrested and executed.
Well, and the sad thing is that, so the same thing that makes the military more apt to understand, right? That role of authority, that there is the head, and that authority flows and makes them more apt to understand, also gives them the other problem because they are vain, they are strong, they know that they can
Right.
overpower,
Right.
right?
They're proud.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
pride.
Yeah.
So the parable, again, is, in my opinion, very clear, very straightforward. It deals with the issue of supersessionism, replacement theology, and it makes the point that God has two valid peoples, two valid vessels, wineskins and wine, that are in the earth. And this goes back to what Zechariah saw in his vision in Zechariah chapter 4, a vision that perplexed Zechariah, that confused him quite a bit. And maybe we can go over there and visit that in Zechariah chapter 4.
Yep.
So maybe you can read that.
Then I answered and said to him, what are these 2 olive trees on the right of the lampstand and on its left? And I answered the second time and said to him, what are the 2 olive branches which are beside the 2 golden pipes, which empty the golden oil from themselves? So he answered me, saying, do you not know what these are? And I said, no, my Lord. Then he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth.
Okay. So that deserves, or it requires, a little bit of interpretation. All right? And
Yes.
I'm going to do that, and you tell me what you think. So Zechariah is perplexed about this vision. What's the vision? What is obviously a menorah,
Right.
7-lamp candle stand, or they didn't have candles at that time, they were oil lamps.
Oil lamp.
Candles came along somewhere in the 700s or something. And so with this menorah, you had 2 branches, what became 2 trees, olive trees.
Right.
And the wonder of it is that the olive oil is what keeps the menorah lit.
Right.
But what was perplexing to Zechariah is that the oil was coming from the menorah and into
The trees.
the 2 branches, the 2 trees. It was confusing. I'm venturing to say that Zechariah walked away from what the angel told him, still confused.
Right.
Right.
Because you read it and you go, that doesn't sound right.
Right.
That doesn't sound right. But you have to understand that Zechariah, first of all, was a Kohen, a priest,
Right.
who would have understood or even be directly involved in keeping the menorah lit. How did they keep the menorah lit? Well, across the Kidron Valley was Gethsemane, what became Gethsemane. Well, that was an olive grove, and it's
Right.
been that way.
Right.
It was that way from going all the way back to the First Temple period. So olives were being pressed and processed for oil in the Kidron Valley, Gethsemane, for the temple. So Zechariah knew the process well. What he was seeing was perplexing. So that's when the angel said, the menorah that you saw is the Lord of the whole earth, and the anointing that's in the branches or in the trees comes from him. He is the anointed one. So the menorah is the Mashiach, the source of the anointing. So the Lord of the whole earth is the Mashiach, the one who provides the anointing. The 2 trees or the 2 branches are the 2 servants who are standing before the Lord of the whole earth. And so God has 2 servants, right? Zechariah.
So in practicality, that's 2 groups of people.
Could
Right.
be. So in the Hebrew now, when it says in verse 14, and they said, and then he said, these are the 2 anointed ones who are standing by the Lord of the whole earth. First of all, they are the anointed ones. Where's the oil coming from? Where's the anointing coming from?
From the lamp.
The menorah, the Lord of the whole earth. The word standing there is amad, and amad is to serve. So standing, the ones who are serving on either side of the Lord of the whole earth, their anointing comes from the menorah. So there you have the picture. It is Messiah, the one who has been given charge by God to bring about redemption. He's been anointed for that purpose. That's why he's the Mashiach. And on either side of him are 2 groups of people, 2 anointed vessels. Trees. When you see a tree, you see many facets of the tree, right? You don't see one object, you see many.
Right.
You see leaves, branches, fruit, root, and everything else. So I believe it's indicative of 2 groups of people that are anointed by God to serve him in the earth. And that, from my perspective, is the old wine, old skins, and the new wine and the new skins. God's two anointed vessels in the earth. So that's controversial. That's dual covenant. But I'm not afraid to say it. There's no one that's going to somehow affect my life negatively for saying this. We don't belong to a denominational structure.
Right.
No one's going to club me over the head for saying anything like this. I'll be ignored.
Right.
Be you know.
Why should today be
minimalized.
different from other days?
we will continue to be minimalized by the Pharisaic movement. But the truth is, it's biblical.
Yeah.
It's sound. It's doctrinally sound.
And it's so
and
beautiful.
and from our perspective, it is reality.
Yeah. And it's beautiful, right? Because there's nothing like the beauty of God taking the thing he had made and the new thing he had made and having them work together versus what we are doing.
In tandem with each other for one purpose.
Yep.
I love what Zechariah saw. He saw, and by the way, John in Revelation chapter 11 had the same vision. He saw the menorah, the two witnesses. So the servants becomes witnesses.
Right.
Yep.
And to be frank with you today, the people of Israel who would stand by faith, I always refer to them as Jeshurun. Jeshurun is made mention of in Deuteronomy and in Isaiah. Jeshurun is those of Israel who are upright and righteous. So I always say Jeshurun, who would stand by faith in the midst of Israel, would be one witness, and the other witness would be the church. You can say the remnant church, the believing church, the church that stands upon his word and does so uncompromisingly. We are the two vessels. We are the two witnesses in the earth. So what does a witness do?
Testifies
He witnesses.
to the truth.
Testifies to the truth. So that's what we're supposed to do. Israel
We testify to that which we have seen.
Right.
and that which has been put within us.
Right.
So Jeshurun, the faithful in Israel, will be one witness, and the church, the believing church, will also be another witness. Does that mean that the rest of Israel isn't included? Of course not.
Right.
Of course not. They are being witnessed too. And the world, the nations are being witnessed against. So a witness can witness for or adversarially against, right?
Sure.
Yep.
The
And
witness
so-
in the courtroom is adversarially witnessing in many cases.
So God's two witnesses, the ones who are standing on either side of the menorah, are going to witness to some in Israel, in the nations, and will also witness against many in the world and in Israel.
Well, if that doesn't raise questions in your thinking, you're dead. So we have a class here. We have a school. We teach through the whole Bible every 2 years. You're welcome to be a part of that. It's also available online. You can check it out on our website. And until next week, shalom.
Oy, 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 she